Hello, my name is Armin. I'm a product specialist with Notch. I have a colleague here with me.
Hello.
So this is Ryan. Ryan is actually the one hosting today's stream. And I'll be sidekick, making sure that we are all on the same page. So I'm going to give some introductions and I'm going to moderate the chat, checking out that you guys are on board. And if you have any questions, we'll make sure that Ryan rigs this up and answers it.
I'll figure it out.
Right, so what you see here in front of you now is several sections. So in this case, there's 6 sections of different modifiers. So we split them up in a way that made sense for us to make a little bit more elaborate setting. So we will start with simple things, and then we're going to progressively make it a bit more complex. So first section will be a conversation about math, continuous, and envelope modifier as is, just as they are. Then we're going to take the same modifiers and we're going to plug them through a range remap, condition modifier, we're going to use value as text, and we're going to use combiner as well. So that's going to be our section 1. Then we're going to move on to the section 2, and there we will work a little bit with expression. So this is for all you matrix lovers who actually manage to code, which I cannot do, but Ryan can. And then is section 3, extractor, hot zones, and proximity. So basically, it's a bit of a more interactive setting. So I think it's going to be quite interesting. Then section 4, bit of logics. So time stretch, quantize modifier, and smooth envelope modifier. And from there on, that sweet, sweet sound modifier for all you VJs. And of course, triggerable envelope modifier. I think Ryan can describe more that specific node when we get there. And then we're going to finish up with the select child node. And obviously, if you have any questions, as I see already popping up in a chat room, accumulate and all the rest, we can actually talk about those as well.
Yeah, we can bring up the accumulator later on.
Ryan, first thing then, math, continuous, envelope.
Okay, we'll finally get into it. So before we start, we should probably think about what a modifier actually is. And a modifier is just a node which takes another node's properties and modifies it. I mean, fundamentally, it's just a bunch of numerical values being changed. So, for example, with a math modifier, by default, it's just going to oscillate a value between 0 and 1 using a sine wave, which is pretty obvious. So, all we need to do, I'll just bring it down, take the output from this node, I'll attach it to the position y of this node, and now it will move up and down along with this sine wave.
So is there more functions available in this math modifier?
Oh yeah, the math modifier, it has tons. So you got cosine, which is somewhat kind of the inverse of sine wave. Got random Perlin noise, which will be really erratic. And saw, which just slowly grows up and then cuts back down, up and back down. Random noise, which is even more erratic than Perlin noise. Interpolated noise, so this is actually still noise, but it's just interpolating between the values.
Yeah, it's kind of smoother, it's like more of a Bezier type of noise.
Yeah, it might actually be what it is. I can't remember now. But yeah, so you get loads of different options with the different kinds of noise. However, I'm going to leave it on sine because the rest of them are...
Before you move on, I think it's important to mention an option if you press back on a math modifier.
Sure.
The thing that I find very useful and important to mention is time mode. So time mode can be locked to timecode or it could be free running. That's actually called use delta. So what that means is that when you run out of time in your timeline, let's say the default is set to 30 seconds, if it's locked to time, it will restart. So you will see a jump. But if you set it to deltas, it will just continuously go on its way and not react to time reset.
Yeah, another really useful tip. I always end up forgetting about this until I absolutely need it to work and then I break it. Yeah, anything else?
Well,
just go straight into the continuous
I guess
modifier?
it's worthy to mention that this math modifier is not necessarily locked to one shape 3D. You could actually pipe it to as many 3D objects or parameters as you want. And I guess that's where the strength of modifiers comes in. Like you don't have to change 25 things. You just attach one thing to 25 different inputs, and then by a tweak of one setting, you can actually drive them all. So that's exactly what Ryan did now.
Yeah, I mean, modifiers are awesome. You end up using them all over the place once you know.
Oh yeah, it just takes time to get used to them. So to be honest, I stopped using keyframes ever since I've discovered modifiers in my life. That's a dad joke again. Right, carry on then.
All right, well, the next one is the continuous modifier. Again, this one's really simple. It's just constantly outputting a continuously rising value, which is often good for rotation. So you can see now it's kind of rotating, but very slowly. And this is because it's only outputting one step per second, and it's in degrees. So if we scale it by like 30, now we see we're coming around 30, or it should move 30 degrees every second, which means it's moving a little bit more. I'm actually going to kill this link because it's getting a bit confusing.
I have a bit of trouble hearing you if you move closer to the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Nice.
I have
Thanks.
to like ever so slightly nudge myself into being comfortable.
It's the precision.
Hopefully that works.
I would say if we were to use a modifier here, it would be smooth envelope modifier to bring it closer. We'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll come to it.
That joke. Right, so this is continuous.
And finally, probably the simplest of all the modifiers, the envelope modifier. And this node, I mean, just like before, rather than doing anything special, like continuously adding to a value or oscillating between a value, it just outputs a value. So as I raise this value, it's going to change that value. If I hold Alt, I can change the ranges. So I'm going to go below, and you can see we're squashing this box into a like pancake, and then stretching it as far as we can go.
So when I'm thinking about envelope modifier, I usually refer to it as a virtual MIDI controller, like a virtual slider on your controller. It's literally that. It's just a virtual slider, and you're in charge of the range or the animation span, or you name it. So literally, you just have an option to turn it on and off, and everything in between.
Yeah, exactly. And I think another thing that's worth noting is the operation output. So for each one of these, there'll be a modifier operation. How does it apply to the node that it's going to? So for example, with the shape 3D at the moment, it's just adding. So it's going to add whatever values in here to whatever value it's overriding here. So if I set this to multiply instead, it's going to multiply it by whatever value. So as I go to 0.5, it's now going close to 0.5. When it goes to 0, it's now flattened it into nothing.
Well, to be honest, I guess it's a lot to expect of you guys to actually know all these things straight out of the box. So it's worthy to mention that we have a direct link to a manual. So if you look at the top corner of the properties panel, you'll see that there's a question mark. Yes, that's the one. So as soon as you click that, you get prompted to the manual page, and there's a bit of a write-up and a bit of an example on how does that specific node, or in this case modifier, works, and what does it do, and how does it interact with the rest of the bunch.
And some of them even have GIFs.
Yes, thank you, Ryan, for making those.
Yeah, that was a lot of time. A lot more time than it really should have taken.
So before we move on to something a bit more complex, I just want to point out that not only you can plug parameters by dragging to the properties panel, you can actually double-click on the node, and you'll have an extensive list of all plausible hookup points. Now, when I say extensive list, it's rather long.
It's really long.
I would advocate that this is not necessarily the best workflow, so it's much better to just plug it up in the properties.
Yeah, in this way, if I want to add it to, Armin, what should I apply this to?
Where are we now? Envelope modifier?
Yeah, we're going to take the envelope.
Position.
All right, so position Y.
Yes.
All right, I'm just going to search.
Well, first you need to spell.
Yeah, spelling is, believe it or not, the first step to finding anything.
Yes. I think Gloom can vouch for that. He's very much into spelling.
There we go.
He likes to correct us when we are wrong. He will comment right now, I'm sure.
Now it is changing the Y position whilst it is adding. Now it's adding to it. So yeah, some fun things you can do with modifiers. You'll spend a lot of time with them. But Armin, how should we take this more advanced?
I think we should take it up a notch.
God damn it.
Yeah, and I think we should add some more modifiers in between the ones that we already have. So I would propose that we try out condition, combiner, and range remap in this setting. So up to you, where do you want to start? Maybe condition?
Yeah, condition's fun. So condition is pretty simple. It takes a value in, and it takes a threshold. and it will only output a value of 0 or 1 depending on the value you put in. So let's say rather than having this value oscillate, we wanted it to only move upward if the value was above 0. So we want to say for this value, right, as it oscillates, check if it is above 0, which I'm going to change the threshold here. I'm going to output that to the same place. And now, every time this math modifier is above 0, it will step upwards. And it doesn't just have to be a value I set in here. It could also be a value set by this envelope. So now this envelope not only controls this node's Y scale, or Y position, because I broke the wrong one, it's also saying at what point this will output a number Y, or a value of 1. Your condition modifier is essentially an if statement. It is if this value is above this value, then it'll output a 0 or a 1.
So for people who joined us just recently, I'm sending out a link to a downloadable file that we are working on here. Should you want to follow or try it or break it, please do. It's available there in the chat.
Yeah, all good fun. What was the next one?
Well, how about the combiner? What does combiner do?
Combiner. So combiner, another really nice node. Sort of again with these simple building blocks, you can take an output of 2 different modifiers and combine them together. So I'm going to take this math modifiers node, and I'm going to combine it with this continuous modifier. And you can see here we've got the continuous modifier here, which is a massive value, and the math modifier coming into value 1. And currently they're set to add, so they're just going to add towards each other. I'm actually going to replace them going into this value.
I'm very pleased to say that we're actually live streaming from London, both of us in one place. We were planning this for a while, and it seems that our neighbors here in the studio is doing some maintenance work. So sorry if you hear some rumble in the background.
There's only so much we can do, isn't there?
Yes, there is no modifier to fix that at the given moment, unfortunately, but we're working on it.
So anyway, very simple here. We've taken the output of this math modifier, actually scaled it up a bit as well, and we've combined it with this continuous modifier as unchanged. And now we're saying add these 2 values together. So as this math modifier is getting higher, it's speeding up this rotation, and as it gets lower, it slows down the rotation. So we're getting this sort of speed up and slow down sort of step movement, which is actually quite nice, I think.
Wouldn't it be more clear what's going on if we actually would be able to express this as text? Like, can we actually see these values as text? Would that be an option?
We are so good at this. We are so good at this. Okay,
it's like,
let's get the...
It's like we rehearsed this.
I know, it is, isn't it? So, if you want to see a value as text, you want to use a value as text node. So I'll just bring this in here, and let's use it for the combiner because it's a more interesting. This is more interactive. So we'll take from here. Now, just because we have text doesn't mean, or a node outputting text doesn't mean that we can visually see it yet. We still need to give it a text node.
Yeah, and the text node is kind of special because it actually requires a typography, so TTF through type font. So you literally are expected to drop it in the resources, and whichever the TTF you drop there, you can actually find it in the drop down. And as soon as you choose that, it's accounted for, and then you can pipe in value as text to the text node.
Yep, so I'm just going to pipe this in here. It will probably come off a little bit offset, so I'll just rotate it around so we can see it and move it around so that we can actually see it.
Ryan is using ERTY shortcuts, E for position, R for rotation.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely not just tabbing through until I find the right one.
That might happen too in the beginning though.
Right, so we've got the value as text, that's bringing out the value from this. So now you can see as I change this, I'm getting the exact value I put out. So,
well, it's just likely at some point you might have to have a visual representation of numeric things changing. It's just handy to know, I guess.
Yeah.
So, range remap. How do we go about remapping the range of the parameters?
Range remap. Okay, that's pretty easy too. So let's get a range remap into the scene. And again, you'll probably be used to how these nodes look now. The range remap is very similar to a lot of the nodes we've seen before, but this time what we're going to do, we're going to pipe this value in straight away. And you can see that this node by default is going to go between a 0 and a 1 space, right? And when it comes into this range remap, we've set it up so that it's going to, by default, look for a 0 and a maximum of 1. But let's say I wanted to remap the range of it. So rather than being between 0 and 1, I wanted it to be between -5 and 52. So I could set the lower to be -5 and the upper to 52. Oh, not 521, that would be quite a lot larger. I'll just kill this setup again. And now, rotation heading, as I change this value, we're now going much further than 0 or 1 degrees because we're remapping that range. So that it's now somewhere between -5 and 52, depending on the value we give it. Yeah, quite simply, it's remapping the range that we give it to any other range that we want it to be.
So since the question came in, and I think it's sort of the same family and same group of modifiers here, would you mind dragging in accumulate modifier?
The accumulator, so the accumulator is where we get a little bit trickier.
We're getting there.
Let's see. So the accumulator is a node that over time accumulates a value. It's quite similar to the continuous modifier in that sense. So if I take that node away, we'll focus on this one here. So we can see the accumulator at the moment is doing nothing. It's being given no value and it's accumulating no value. If I give it a output from this modifier, we can see it's slowly growing and it will continue to do so infinitely. If I set this value to 0 or just below 0, we can see that it's slowed and it isn't quite stopping. It is still growing, just very slowly because it's being given a very small value to accumulate by. And so essentially an accumulator is a node which takes whatever input is added to it and it will just slowly grow larger and larger over time depending on what value you give it.
So before we move on any further, I think it's a good option to talk a little bit about aesthetics of node graph and good housekeeping. So at some point you might find yourself with 25 math modifiers and 150 envelopes. It's going to be messy. So a good practice would be to rename it in accordance to a function they fulfill. Let's say this is for the scale, this is for the speed. Added value of actually being able to read the name is the search functionality. So with Control F, you can actually find specific node you're looking for. I'm sure Ryan will demonstrate that now with at least one of them.
I want to get rid of that accumulator that I lost. Oh, there it is. Boom.
Fair enough. So yeah, you can rename the node by hitting F5 or by right-clicking and finding the function for that. It's just in the list.
Yep.
There we go. And if you give it a specific name and you're just wandering around in a node graph, as soon as you're going to hit Control F and type in that name, it's going to be brought into the very center of the graph. So with that said, how about a little bit more extreme things? Extremes, that's the bad word for it. A little bit more complex thing. Expression for all of the matrix people here who actually can code and write.
So the expression
problems.
modifier this is where you're doing stuff that you can't really do with normal modifiers. So, and I'm going to have to embarrass myself. I don't quite remember all of the things you can do off the top of my head. There is a website, which I believe is on the manual page. But let's see what's connected here. So the expression modifier, what it does, I'm just going to copy out this math modifier a few times. It will take the values you give it, value 0, value 1, value 2, and it will do whatever you tell it to do with it. So let's take these two values first. Oops.
Do you want me to find you a
First?
formula of sorts?
I can come up with one.
All right, fair enough.
I can sometimes math.
Well, we shall put that to the test
Yes,
now.
we will have to. So, given this expression, I'm going to say, I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger. a little more obvious. So I'm just editing this string by pressing the S icon. I'm going to say value 0 to, well, let's say to the power of 0.75, because that's a weird number. I'm going to multiply that by value 1 to the power of 2.5. Let's see, 1.5, let's see what that does. What, not 12.5 there, that would be huge. So, as I said, we're just taking this value that's going in. We're going to set it to the power of 0.75, and we're going to multiply that by value 1 to the power of 1.5. So let's see what kind of value this outputs.
It is very likely that you might want to use brackets as well.
It is a massive number. I should have planned that. Okay, let's be a little more
conservative.
We'll go that way. We'll delete this link. We'll add this link. Let's see how this one works. Where's our shape?
Are you sure you don't need brackets? Oh yeah, there it is.
It's just moving up and down, and it moves. What's happening is it's getting negative. When it goes negative and you're powering by less than a half, it goes to -1, and it goes nuts. So let's offset this by 1 and this by 1, so it can't power itself by -1/2. Is that right?
Yeah, it's there. It's doing it.
It's kind of doing it.
I guess it makes sense for a lot of people who are coming from After Effects background, as Gloom pointed out, that most famous expression, wiggle, you can actually set it out here too, should you want that. But to be honest, there's so many different modifiers that hopefully you don't even need to write any formula, any code. You can just actually chain them up and sort of have it running as you like.
I will one day remember what formula I used earlier. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Infinity right there.
A lovely, simple infinity. First time.
How can infinity be simple?
First time.
How just, it's never simple, is it?
It depends on the kind of infinity, I suppose.
Are there functions like wiggle from? Yeah, I think you could probably use math modifier set to.
Yeah, if you wanted to do wiggle, as I recall, it's been a while since I used it at this point.
How about Perlin noise? Because then it's literally just oscillating between values, or a random noise if you want more specific numbers. So Perlin would be more sort of Bezier type of.
Yeah, so I'd be doing
interpolate
Perlin noise.
Yes.
Probably changing the scale down a bit, or maybe lowering the octaves, and then just do the same thing again on another axis and give it an offset of whatever that is. And then between the two of these, whatever you apply it to, it's going to wiggle along that axis. I think actually we have a bin for camera shake.
That is a good point. So if you go to the view and call out the panel bins, you will see that there's quite a few useful tools, and there's anything from lighting to materials to the bracket of tools, which literally has some things that is rigged with modifiers for your benefit, for your daily use.
Yeah, let's try this one out. So we've got it parented like that. So now we've got, well, you can see it's very slightly shaking. So if I
guess this shake makes more sense when it's actually used with camera, because obviously on a 3D object it's...
Yeah, you're intentionally using camera shake if you actually are using it like that, but I'm just showing that it's possible. So we up the... that's good enough. So you can see you can do that kind of thing as well.
So how about that interactive setting then? Let's maybe try mouse picker, and let's set up some hot zones with extractors and proximity modifiers.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Nice.
Just hide that one. Open up this one.
Can you first of all introduce us to the scene? Like, what do we have here? What is going on here?
I mean, it's tremendously simple, really. We've got a cloner over here, cloning a shape 3D, and a plane effector. And as we move around this plane effector, we can see we shrink the clones, so there's sort of a gap.
So there's a small fall off, yeah? That's exactly what drives the circle in the center.
Yes, exactly. So We want to make this interactive. Do you want to do it with the mouse picker sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that could be a good start. Let's do that.
So here we go, the mouse picker. The mouse picker is a node which just takes the current position of the mouse in the viewport, or whatever scene you're looking at it from. So if I add a shape 3D, we just parent that to the mouse picker, you can see that as I move this shape 3D around, it's following the mouse, right? Which is nice and simple, but not that interesting. So let's try and make it a little more interesting. So add it back to this node, and let's say we only want the mouse to appear when we click, because at the moment it's just going to appear all the time. Or actually, first step, let's make it so that this now follows that. So what I've done there is I've taken the plane effector and I've childed it to the shape 3D. So the shape 3D is now telling it where to move. And the mouse picker is telling the shape 3D where to move. So it's sort of a chain of, hey, you move, yes, then this moves, and then together they're both moving at the same time.
So this family relation of parent-child thing is actually quite interesting, because you may have used cloners before, and you may have noticed that all the effectors has a top handle for parenting, but you don't end up using them. And the reason why we have a parenting there in the top is so you could actually chain up several of effectors and control them at once by hooking it exactly as Ryan did. So for instance, he could have like 4 effectors hooked up via the parenting, and then that shape 3D or mouse picker would drive all 4 of them at once.
Yeah, and it's like a really easy, quick way to set it up as well. Like one mouse drag, and I've set that up. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to make it so that this sphere only appears when I click. And like you might be able to hear, if we haven't set our audio up properly, that every time I click is when it registers the movement. So when I'm over here, it doesn't know to move until I tell it to click. That's what the mouse picker is set to. So what I want is probably the most powerful node that you don't know about.
It's one node to rule them all.
Yeah, it's the extractor. So what the extractor does is it looks within the data of another node and it pulls out extra things that you can use that you might not know about. For example, the source envelope here, we can tell it to look for left button. So now, whenever I click, this node is going to output a 1. So if I set that to...
I'm going to stop you now. Before you move on, just to mention, this works not only with interactive tools like mouse picker or even shape 3D, we could pipe it to shape 3D, but even with the face tracking. So I think it would be cool if we just, for a second, drag in face tracker, and you guys would see how many options you have for face tracking via this extractor node. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like once we add a face tracker node, we're not going to set up the whole face tracking today.
No, and there's a tutorial in our YouTube channel, so if you find yourself having 10 minutes to spare, please check it out.
Yeah, you can see it's tracking the face size, the separation of the eyes, the position of each eye, whether the mouth is open or not, how much each eye is open, whether or not it's
found
huge.
and wink and all that, all crazy stuff.
Even the image size it's going to be able to pick up. So this is a super, super useful node. You really want to, like, if you're not aware of it now, you want to start getting to know it, because it is huge in and of itself.
Cool. So let's see its magic then in progress.
So yeah, very basic setup we're going to do here. I'm going to say look for a left button press, and when you do it, I want to change the visibility of this sphere. I want it to not be visible when I'm not clicking. Now at the moment, as we remember, because it has a modifier operation, it's just going to add. So when I'm moving around and I click, it will just add a value to this visible property. So what I like to do is either set it to multiply or replace. And now it's not going to be there until I click. And as soon as I let go, it's gone. And click, and it's back, gone, back. And no matter where I go, no matter what I do, as long as I'm clicking, it's there. And as soon as I let go, it's gone. And it knows, or it's detecting whenever I click and outputting a value whenever I want it to.
Okay, can I ask you to showcase one of my favorite nodes, hot zones?
Hot zones.
Hot zones.
So hot zones are super cool because these nodes are really good for just detecting when something is in an area. So Right now we have a hot zone here. It's just set to box. I'm going to set it to sphere because I like it better. I'm going to take an output from this. I'm going to say into the test points. So we're saying to this shape 3D, you are a test point to the hot zone. So the hot zone is going to be looking for this shape 3D and saying, hey, when does this get into my area? And then again, and we can use the extractor again, as I mentioned earlier. We're going to use the extractor to look to take out that property of whether it is in that area or not. So we could say current hit zone, in which case it will output specifically which hit zone it's in, but I just want to know whether it's in any hit zone. So I'm going to take that value out, and let's say the sphere gets bigger. Let's change the scale of the sphere. So I'm just going to take the output from here, scale X, scale Y, and scale Z. So now, as I move around, we can see we're the same size as small and then big. As soon as we go into that zone, doubles in size.
Can we somehow mark that zone so we actually visually see?
Yeah, sure. Let's. Well, we don't want to do like a big shape 3D and then blending things. Let's just do.
Something simple, just so we know.
Yeah, let's take it like this. I'm just going to parent it to the hot zone so it's within the same area, and if we move the hot zone around, it'll move the shape as well. I'll set it to ring. We'll set it on the right axis. Is it Z? It's Z. Right, and I'll just adjust these. See that we're on? Where am I at? Oops. Oops. Oh, I know what's going on. I'll just set it to torus instead. There we go. Just round that out. And if we look at the area of our hot zone, it's just a little bit larger. And because I'm going to be lazy, I'm just going to scale it. So we'll just bring it out like that.
I guess it's worth it to point out that you can actually define zones by adding bounding boxes as well, just so you know.
Yeah, you can add zone inputs here, so it will look for the zone that you give it.
Yeah, I mean, you can even use an external bounding box node if you want to, if you're making a 3D scene, let's say, and use a motion capture suit, and it walks about, and as soon as it gets that specific area, do something. So that's where you would set in an external bounding box.
Yeah, so we can see now that as soon as it gets within this area, it doubles in size.
Now, I have to be picky, Ryan. I am not satisfied with the color selection here. Could we please make those two shapes yellow?
Okay, fine. What color?
Yellow.
Yellow.
Dark yellow.
Dark yellow.
Towards orange.
All right, so like this kind of...
Yes.
Remember? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to do that for both?
Yes, please. Thank
both
you.
Of them.
Please and thank you.
Please and... Oh, okay.
So in this case, it's going very abruptly, sort of, it's on-off switch, isn't it? Can we somehow solve similar situation or condition with a bit more smooth approach?
Okay, so you want it so that as it gets within this shape...
Yeah, it becomes bigger as it progresses.
Okay, well, I'll give you two ways. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to alpha blended and just lower the transparency, because at the moment it just pops out of nowhere. There we go. Now we can see this sort of stepping it's doing. So one thing we could do is we'll jump ahead a bit and we'll use the smooth envelope modifier. Now what this node does is it takes the output from another node and it smooths the data coming in. So if I connect this up like so, and we wire all of these back up again, you can see now, as I go in, it slowly grows. It doesn't just jump to that position.
I bet if you would click on smooth envelope, you would actually see how the information is going. Yeah, that's the first current value hitter there. So it actually shows how fast or slow it actually goes. And you have attack and decay options to make sure how long should it take for it to get active or inactive.
It's really slow though, so I'm just going to set it to like 5. So I'm not here all day just trying to watch it.
Oh, right. Are you getting upset now?
It's a bit small. It's a bit slow as well. Let's give it like 2.5.
You're into real time, not wasted sort of setting.
No, I am an impatient man.
Fair enough. I think we all share this property because we all work with this real-time tool. I subscribe into no patience thing.
There we go. So now that's one way to smooth it, but I mean, that is just smoothing a value between 0 and 1. You probably want like a smooth gradient. The closer you get into the center, the larger it gets, right?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
So at this point, we're not going to use hot zones because hot zones are really good for like, is something in this area? It's not built for how much is something in this area. So let's use a different system. I'll just hide the hot zone itself, and I'll use a different node. This is a proximity modifier. And I shall add a new shape. Just copy and paste the same one. And hide that one. So this node, I'm going to move to the side so we can see it in a different area. So we'll take this one here. We'll leave the same one on here. Just move this over there so we can use them both. And we're going to say, OK, proximity modifier. When something gets between this area, which we'll set, I bet that that is about an outer radius of 2. So when a value gets within this area, output a value based on how close it is to the inner radius of this area. And now we need to tell the proximity modifier what to test against, or what to be looking for, which is this node. And we're going to do a similar thing again, get an envelope node. Because this, we don't need to like this in the same way we did with the hot zone, figure out which zone it's in or whatever. We only have one zone and it's outputting that value anyway. And we'll just do the same thing again, except this time we're outputting to the exact same values, the scale. Scale.
Yeah, it's worth it to point out that you can reuse the same inputs with several modifiers if that is needed.
Yeah, so now as I move around, you can see jump up. Ooh. Oh, I wonder why that isn't working. Anyway, you can see as we get closer into the circle, it gets bigger. As we get further away, it gets smaller.
I guess there's a need for one or the other depending on what you're building.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a little bit hard to anticipate exactly what one would go for, but here we are just laying down the basic concepts of one modifier working as is and several modifiers working in a chain.
Yeah, it's all depending on what system you want. Do you want it to work like this, or I wonder what happened here. I wonder why it's not picking up. I must have deleted something whilst not paying attention.
Or you might have just changed a setting here and there or something.
Yeah, we're going far beyond my preparations.
We are good at making poor choices. Okay, cool. So this all makes sense. How about then some logics? Can we talk about logics?
Sure. What kind of logics?
Yes.
Is it the time stretch that you're wanting to look at?
Yes, it's time stretch. Time stretch, I find it's one of the most useful nodes. I'd say anything that is generative in Notch can be time stretched. So you're in control of the time there. I'm going to stop because I'm going to drop a dad joke and I don't want to.
It can be a get out of jail free card. It is so useful.
Yes,
so
good point.
Here we have an animation, a simple guy running animation. Really, I think we just got this from Mixamo.
Yeah, I cannot stress enough how cool Mixamo is. It's part of Adobe package. If you have Adobe subscription, you have access to Mixamo.com, and there you have a lot of animated character. Well, you have a lot of characters, and you have a lot of animations that you can use with those. Do check it out; it's great.
So you'll notice when we hook up the time stretch without actually doing anything, it continues to work as normal. But the key thing with time stretch is that we can do this. We can slow down the time. We can make him run in slow motion without having to change anything else about the node, without even having to look at it or what its playback speed is. We can just slow it down. We can speed it up, slow it down.
Don't get him too tired. He's going to be running for a while.
That's true.
To add to this, I'd say that there's a time modification mode property, and that's quite interesting one too, because now we're affecting speed, but if you invert it to absolute time, you actually are in control of the animations that are preloaded to this, let's say, FBX model. So all of a sudden, you can set a trigger to either animate or stop animating this very FBX sequence.
Yeah, so if you wanted to set up using it to run the exact same way as it was beforehand, we can just take a continuous modifier and pipe that into the time mode. And now it's just running like we did before. But you could do something crazy, like let's take a math modifier, pipe that into the time again, just slow him down before he starts breaking his ankles.
He is a test guy, but I think he has his limits too.
We'll offset it by 1. So now he's sort of running backwards and forwards a little bit confusingly. But you can just easily set that up.
Is that how they did bullet time in Matrix?
Probably.
Trick question. I'm sure it's not.
Probably.
But probably.
There's so many different ways you can do it in the Matrix that I don't think they needed to. But
Fair
maybe.
enough. All right, cool. So obviously there are more applications for time stretch. Do you have anything else ready for us as a showcase of time stretch?
So this is where I love time stretch personally. Armin likes his geometry.
I like
You
my
like your running
geometry.
around
I like
and
my Truchet generator, and I like my geometry.
Yeah, I like my particles.
Fair
and
enough.
I love that I can just take a time stretch. Here we go.
Well, before you go any further, can you just explain a little bit to us what you have there, what's going on?
Oh, sure. So this is a very basic scene. You've got some curl noise going on, some particles, and some lighting. It's nothing fancy, nothing.
So the whole motion of
surprising.
this is driven by one node, the curl noise fluid effector,
Yep.
correct?
Take it off, and it's boring. You put it back on, and it's fun.
And this sort of shading is voxel cone shader.
Yeah, this node, you just give it a bounding box, and it'll light your particles based on the position of a light and the values you set within the voxel cone.
And these are
density
2D
scale.
sprites. It's just sort of textures, PNG files or something.
Yeah,
like
each
that.
one of these is a 2D gradient, a gradient 2D, just set to radial. You can see I've added a little bit of motion blur, so as they move, in the point renderer, so as they move, they'll exaggerate their movement a little bit more as they're moving quicker. Let's actually make that a bit faster.
Ooh, look at that.
Yeah, now they're probably moving too much.
Yeah,
But
they
it's too
they
late
are
now.
getting a bit of flicker
Yeah.
there as well, but that's fine, I guess.
Yeah, you can
Creative
smooth that out.
choice. All right,
Yeah,
so I stopped you there. Let's go for the
Yeah,
let's
come
go
on.
for the main thing.
Don't keep me from my time stretch. No, I want my time stretch.
I will not stretch you further.
Yeah, clever. So the time stretch, I'll just move that down. So what we're going to do is, just like before, we can set it to speed or absolute time. You can see that I can just step through and backwards in time. Now, backwards in time can break your particle emission, as you can see here. The particles are like moving beyond where they actually spawned, but sometimes that can lead to really awesome effects like this, which is that you like couldn't do any way else. That is really the power of this node. And what I quite like is you add a continuous modifier. Check. A quantized modifier, if you spell it properly. So
2-0, isn't it now?
I mean,
Because
yes.
I never make mistakes when I'm spelling. Just so you know.
Okay, well, Ben, can you make sure that if he spells anything wrong, I find out about it? Good point. He's about 4 seconds behind.
Okay.
Okay, so what we've got here is a quantized modifier. This is similar to like a modulo, I think a few of you have mentioned. If the value that comes into it, it's going to step and make sure that it rounds that value. So, for example, if I add this, it probably won't work in that connection, but as you can see, it's getting 45, 46, 47. Then once it's got a node to connect to, it'll be outputting a hard 48, 49, 50. It won't show any decimal places.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. If you want to round up numbers, that's probably the best way to go about.
Right. So next step, again, this is just something I really like to do. We're going to smooth that value. So we're still getting those changes again. I'm just going to up the smoothing a bit more. And then we take from this and we go to our time stretch. And we're going to offset the time based on this. And you get this pulse sort of animation as the particles get pushed through time a little bit more and faster, and then they slow down again. It's this really nice sort of effect that I really like. What we can do is we can exaggerate it even more by increasing the quantized modifier and lowering down maybe the decay. Yeah, now we get a little bit longer of a pulse. We could even get back to the curl noise and up its fluid simulation amount. So we're getting this burst and push in different directions, which then hangs in the air. It's just really awesome. I just love messing around with it because you can just do these really awesome little freeze frames almost.
Fair enough.
It is something I can just sit and play with all day, but I'm assuming that Armin is going to tell me to stop at some point.
Yeah, I'm gonna be the mean guy in the room, and I'm gonna say that maybe now is a good time to touch on a sound modifier.
Sound modifier?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, sorry about that. The sound modifier is pretty basic. All you need to do is, not simple or basic, it's just easy because all it's doing is taking a value from a capture sound. Capture sound is going to look for a sound input on your machine. The sound modifier, I'm just going to set the channel to, not channel, band frequency to waveform, so it's looking at the whole waveform. And it's going to output a value based on that, just how loud the value coming in is. So here we've got a connection we can quickly pipe in to the position Y. And now as I'm speaking, you can see that object is changing its position. Armin, do you have anything to say to offset it?
Luke, I am your father.
I shouldn't have offered that.
Yeah, well, you asked for it. Nobody forced you.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
All right.
We can also smooth it because it's like really erratic at the moment, so we can smooth it.
Yeah,
a
I
bit
was
more, so it's
about
not
to
just
ask,
horrendous.
can we sort of fix the jitteriness of this?
Yeah, just smooth it a lot more.
So in all
that'll
intents and purposes, sound modifier is to be used just like math or continuous modifier, to be honest. It's probably worthy to mention that there's capture sound, which refers to microphone or system attached for sound capture. And there's play sound. So play sound
Yeah,
would
good
be
point.
used if you have a sound file available in your resources.
Yeah, so if we had a song that we downloaded and we wanted to play and had the rights for, then we could have added a song into this resources window and then played along with the sound.
If we actually had friends who are artists, musicians, yeah, it could have worked out. But I think you get the gist. I think it's worthy to mention, if Ryan would click on a sound modifier for a moment, that there's an input for sound there as well. So if you click on sound modifier, please and thank you.
Yeah.
If you go a little bit higher, please and thank you. Yeah, you see there's sound drop down. So that drop down works best if you have a track based on stems, where you have drums and keyboard and guitar as a separate file. So basically have a ton then of sound modifiers with different stems inside. And as soon as you start playback, they all will start at the same time, and you will have specific frequencies or ranges for specific instruments. This is going to be more accurate, because usually drums and bass and sometimes synths sort of just mush together, and it's really hard to make specific sound to be attached to a specific range. I'm done with my shtick. Please carry on.
Yeah, sure. So I think the other thing we wanted to talk about here was the triggerable envelope. So we could trigger an animation based off...
good point. That's actually a very, very cool workflow as well. That sometimes is really needed, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, we keep talking about get out of jail free cards. All these modifiers sort of are get out of jail free cards in different ways.
So if are we referring to Monopoly? That's like pass, go, and collect 800 as well.
I think it's 200, but...
it depends on the settings you set.
Well, I mean,
It's an agreement
I want to
thing.
play Monopoly in Norway. It seems a lot more fun.
It's a gentleman's agreement there.
Okay, so the triggerable envelope modifier, what makes this different from any other node? Well, this node, it can play back a keyed animation once a value is triggered. So it's sort of like a combination of a condition modifier and an envelope, which allows it to do really crazy things. So I'm going to start by pausing, home, keying, and starting a small little animation in the wrong window timeline. So we'll just add another key here, set it like there. Another key here, set it like there. This would be really fun if it was more entertaining.
I can make some background noises. Would that help?
Go ahead.
I think actually it would ruin it. You already didn't like my comment about Luke. I am your father.
That's true. I should have said nothing. You're right.
Okay.
Just zero it out, and because I know how this zeroes out, I know I can get an extra kick by doing that.
By the way, am I the only one excited about Baby Yoda? Is there any Star Wars fans here?
I'm a Star Wars fan, and I don't even care.
You are busy rigging things. I'm entertaining now. You said you need a background. I am the background. So whenever you're done with your keyframes.
Yeah, this will do. All right, so we've got a value coming in. We're saying, okay, sound modifier. After you reach past this trigger threshold, which I'll make quite high so it isn't just triggered all the time, I want you to change the Y position of this shape 3D based off of this curve that we just created. And if we follow that logic and I clap, we get that animation. Nice and simple. Now you can trigger this based on any random input, and you can tell that it will continue to bounce up and down every time I speak too loudly. So apologies to everyone's ears.
But does it start exactly when you start to speak, or does it start when it finishes the sequence that you set in?
So it starts every time it gets a value. So I can set it so that it's probably easier if I show this with, rather than a sound modifier, I just add an envelope. If we bring this back in. So right now, as this envelope is set to 1, this triggerable envelope is going to constantly play back that animation. Just once, over and over again, it's going to play that animation. If I set it to only do it on change, it will only play back that animation when it either comes above that threshold or below that threshold. So if I change it to below that threshold, animation plays. Above the threshold, animation plays. If I wanted it to only play when it changed to true, so only play when I am above the when I've set it to go to above the threshold once, we can see I changed it to below, didn't play, changed to above, plays. So the trigger envelope node is a super useful node. Actually, it was one of the nodes I used in my keyframe remap bin, because you can get really useful things with it.
Oh yeah, that's a crazy setup. I actually would advise you guys to check it out and, well, see if it would fit any of your projects. Right.
Yeah, it's a super useful node. It's really cool.
Triggerable envelope giveth, and it taketh.
Yes.
Okay, I think we can both agree that select child is great node. Can we check out how would one rig it? I think we do have time for that.
Select child? Yeah, we've got loads of time for that. Select child is a pretty simple node. Once again, all this node does is selects the child that you give it based on the index that you select, and it will. If you, just think about what I'm saying for more than 3 seconds.
So basically, anything you connect via select child node as a child, you actually have an indexed control. So you choose whichever the one should be rendered if you just change the child's index.
Yes, so as any of you programmers will be familiar, your index starts at 0. So as we start at 0, it's going to show the first object. We go to 1, it's going to show the second object. If we go to 2, we'll show the third object, and then onwards, it's not going to show any more objects because
there is no more
there aren't
objects.
any more left.
Ooh, another thing that is probably worthy to mention, just like anything else in Notch, select child regards stacking order, either from top to bottom or from left to right. So now if Ryan would change these shape 3Ds in space, for instance, they would just move around. Yeah, exactly, maybe set it up a bit differently. You will see that the index changes together with that. So all of a sudden, there's a different number 1 or the 0, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. I think it's just worthy to mention. So stacking order is very important here.
Yeah, especially with this node. So lastly, I'll just set this to saw, so I'm getting that upward. Cycle, we'll change the child index, and then we just want to set this to, let's say, 0.5 on the offset and 2 on the scale. Yeah, that'll do. Not spend too much time making something perfect. So now we're cycling through these three objects. It's just going to show one, then the other, and the other, and just keep sequencing through forever. Nice and easy.
All right, cool. This is more or less all we actually prepared. Obviously, there's, if you open the list, please, and thank you, Ryan.
Modifiers.
there's a whole stack of those. It's this insane number. You probably would have to spend a little bit of time testing them out. Now, the good thing is that they're written up in manual, and there's a little sample or explanation how to run them. Now, before we move on to Q&A, I'm just going to mention that we have MIDI modifier and OSC modifier. So for interactive settings, if you use MIDI control boards or OSC tablet, well, this is literally how you set it up. It's the same concept as using math or envelope. You just make sure that you get information in. So if Ryan would press on the MIDI modifier now for a second, you will see that there is a 3-dot square box saying listen for channel CC. So as soon as you hit that and slide the slider or tweak the rotary knob, you are there. It's literally attached. I would, however, make sure that the MIDI controller is actually available for you. So if you go to devices, I think it's going to come there as a audio device. So if Ryan will press now on devices in the top panel, please, and thank you.
Oh, that one.
Yes.
There's lots of device buttons.
I know. Audio and MIDI. Yes, that's the one.
There we go.
Perfection. So if you had a MIDI, and I see that there is some kind of a MIDI attached to this machine, but anyways, it will appear there, but keep in mind important information. Windows is unforgiving. If there's another software that takes MIDI signal opened, and it was opened before Notch, it will overtake the signal. You will not see your MIDI controller unless you're using third-party plugin that allows you to route the signal. I think similar applies to OSC. Now, OSC rigging, we actually have a tool for that. Maybe we can whip out the network monitor.
Yeah, sure.
So basically, when you set up your OSC settings in the whatever the system you're building those, just make sure to set it in the protocols. I think that would be project settings. Protocols. Yeah, and enable OSC there. And as soon as you enable it, if you slide the slider or press a button, you will see information coming in via connection monitor. Now, that same information or address, it will be something like /1/layer or a trigger or a slider 1. You just copy out to the OSC modifiers property, which Ryan will show now.
Ooh. I'm doing that thing we told me not to do, which is read the comments.
Oh, please do not read the comments. I am here for the comments. I am the comment master. Press cancel.
Cancel, done.
Press OSC modifier.
OSC modified, done.
Yep, and where you see OSC address, that's exactly where we paste in whatever the address the connection monitor actually gives you. Right, questions. Now we can both read the comments, the chat.
God.
There we go.
Right, is there anything worth mentioning that you've noticed so far?
Well, one question that popped up quite early was accumulate modifier, and then I asked Gloom to check out and assist us should we missed something, or it popped in some other streaming venue.
I'll take a couple of these extra comments here. So if you want, let's see.
Which one are you addressing now?
Well, I'll just take these here, the speed tracking modifier, the gradient remap, and the direction weighted. So where's the speed tracking? Speed tracking node, will take a bit to set up, but the way it works is based on an input tracked node, it will check, it will output its speed between 0 and its maximum. So if you've got a node moving around really quickly, really fast, then it will output a greater value versus another speed tracking node that's moving really slow. So that's a really easy way to just find out how quick one node is moving. What's the other one? The gradient remap. Gradient remap is very simple. It's sort of like the value remap or the range remap, except it's only going to take a value from 0 and 1 and change it to be based on a gradient. So if I take, let's go back to our original sort of messing around files here. I'm going to remove that connection monitor as well because it's taking a bit of screen real estate. Right, so let's focus on this red box here. I'm going to take the gradient remap and apply to its Y scale again. I'm going to take from this envelope again. So as before, we can see when I change this value, I'm changing the Y scale, but the key thing is it's not linear anymore. It sort of has it speeds up at the beginning and it slows down at the end. You can hopefully see that. And that is basically what it's doing. It's mapping it based on this gradient. I can change that gradient. I can make it so it speeds up, slows, or it gets to the top, goes to the bottom, and goes to the top again. So now when I change this value, you can see, even though it's up here, it went to the top, and went back down, and went back up again. So it's basically a way of remapping values based on a given curve you want to have. And that curve is controlled by a gradient.
I think I have a interesting one for you, Ryan. I would like to see if you can solve this. It came through another streaming venue that we're using now. How would you set up an accumulator so it gets one higher every beat from the beat pulse modifier? So basically, it adds one every time.
So let's bring in this beat pulse modifier. I'm going to just output it to the values text now. And let's bring in the accumulator. So we want the accumulator to output individual steps. So we'll bring in a quantize again. So now the quantize is going to say, whatever value I'm getting from the accumulator, I want to step that so it's more individual. The value as text is going to then display that value. So if I give this a beat pulse modifier, what's it going to do? So this is going to accumulate 1, 2, 3. All right, we want to change it. We'll just slow down that beat because it's almost way too fast. So now every time we get a beat, we want that to output a new step. So like that. So we want it to output a value. We want that value to increase. The key thing with the accumulator is it's going to accumulate this value over time. So with this beat pulse at the moment, it's going to accumulate whatever value it gives it within this pulse. And it's going to do that at a rate per second. So if I raise the scale on this a bit, I might be able to get it to do it a bit more. At maybe here, we'll increase the attack. Actually, that should be fine. Scale. And we'll just reset that. Too high. Yeah, it's basically get it to this point and then play with the scale until it's doing it right, I think. Is that right? That's close. Somewhere between 3 and 2.5, I think, although I'm covered by bright lights and I can't quite see what I'm doing. Yeah, I mean, if I was to do it, I would do it based off of this setting, and then how you change the BPM would probably change the way that value is added as well. You'd have to link those two values now I think about it. Yeah, there isn't a direct way to get this connection set up at the moment. It's actually something we're going to look into for the next release, is make this whole connection and like stepping of values coming in a little bit easier, because at the moment it's a bit of annoying. Any more questions?
I am typing away one answer here. Bam.
Furiously typing away.
Furiously.
Furiously typing away.
Yeah, actually, it seems that we have one question here, which is quite specific, so it would be nice if that one would come into the support channels. I guess that would help easiest, because it's kind of hard to get into a scope of what is being worked on, but just chatting away, it's probably going to be easier if we just see the file. Best way to link values, directly. Best way to link values is directly.
Yes,
so
exactly right.
As Ryan showed, the easiest way probably to go to properties, but you can double tap on the node and you will see the all available hookups. I think it's a legacy way of linking up things. Just press on a node.
It's always easier just to do this.
Yep, pretty much.
If we come right back.
Alex is asking about delay value node. Would you care to quickly showcase that?
The delay value node, it's very basic, very simple. You take a value and you delay its actual timing. So if I pipe this into, I don't even know which one I'm offering anymore. So as I offset, it will delay, yeah, there you go, it will delay its changing of that value. So it's currently waiting 1 second, I believe. So 1 second after I change it, it changes the value. If you want that smaller, you shorten the delay value, and now it will move a lot quicker.
All right, so I think I'm going to mention that this is obviously recorded, so you'll be able to watch this on our YouTube channel, so just search for Notch VFX. And I guess we're calling it a day, so thank you, Ryan, for all these samples.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing to know is, like, with modifiers is just to play around with them, because there's so many different things you can do. And almost all of them, I think actually all of them have manual pages, so you'll be able to find out more and figure out all these different connections. A lot of this stuff that we've shown today is just sort of taking stuff from the manual and figuring out, like, how these weird connections work. So and playing around with these nodes, you can spend days coming up with, like, weird stuff, especially with time stretch. Yep.
Yeah. So, I should probably mention that we have podcasts happening. So there's a new episode coming out tomorrow, and if you want to check out our podcast, it would be podcast.notch.one. I'm sure that our friend Gloom will drop a link here in the comments in a second. Otherwise, no shortcut in learning these modifiers. You have to spend some time, try them out, and find the ones that is most useful for you. I hope we shed some light on quite a few of them today. All right. With that said, thank you guys very much for joining us today, and see you in the next decade.
Yes, in the next decade.
In the next decade. Right, thank you. Goodbye.
There we are. Bye.